Hello, and welcome to a webinar on the record keeping recommendations for the CACFP, which is the Child and Adult Care Food Program. This session is specific to the child care programs. So if that does not apply to you, please stay tuned for a special session for your agency type. One of the reasons we decided to air this webinar is to help you make your review less stressful. Wanted to point out that organization is really key for the success of your review. And so we're going to go over a couple of best practices and some key reminders to help things go well. Our staff from our program compliance team are required to make unannounced visits to centers to make sure that your program is running according to both the USDA and MSDE rules. So keeping your records organized helps minimize the stress and burden of these reviews. Some of the things that we'll be looking at are listed here on the slide. They include participant eligibility records, attendance records, and point of service meal counts, documents to validate that the menu you've written was actually implemented, and documents to validate you are meeting the CACFP meal pattern and food crediting rules, and also to have documentation of your CACFP training. And for our multi-site sponsors, we'll be looking to make sure you have site monitoring forms and staff training records. So in order to be prepared for the unannounced reviews, the records that we're going to be talking about today must be available during your normal business hours. You must correctly list your days of operation and your times for meal service within the MARS computer system. This is the information our team will use to plan their visit. For electronic records, please remember that these also must be accessible during an unannounced review. So that means that if you only have one person who has access to a particular computer or computer system, that you should have a backup in case we do happen to show up when that person is on vacation. You know how Murphy's Law plays out. To help maintain the confidentiality of other documents in your office, we suggest that you maintain your CACFP records separate from the child's other personal information. All right, some helpful information here. The CACFP runs from October 1st to September 30th each year. That is the federal fiscal year. Please keep your records organized according to those dates. You'll need to maintain 4 years of records. That's 3 full years plus however far into the current year we have gotten. So again, 3 full years plus the current year. You've probably seen this sheet before. This is something we provided at last year's administrative meeting, and it is a guide that you could use to help set up a file cabinet or binder, whatever you're using to maintain your records. The color-coded system you see on the screen now could be each little section of a binder or a section of a file cabinet. Now let's see some real-life examples and how they might be showing up in your records. First, we'll take a look at the participant eligibility section. For this, you'll see a couple bullet points here. I'm going to show you in more detail what this will look like. First, you have a master eligibility list. This is a good way to help ensure your center meets the income eligibility requirements of the CACFP. This document helps organize key participant eligibility information and must be kept secure and confidential. So some of the key information on this sheet, you'll see the name and the date of determination. So as soon as you have determined eligibility, and that is done either through a meal benefit application or a form of collateral documentation, which we'll briefly mention in a little bit, you'll need to record the name and that date of determination on this master eligibility sheet. You'll also need to indicate what category that individual qualified. So again, this is going to be used each month as you submit your claims, so accuracy is key. And our compliance team will also use this record to help verify that you have claimed your meals in the correct category. Remember, eligibility determinations expire after 1 year, that's 365 days. So make sure you have a system in place to notice when your participant's eligibility expires. If a child's eligibility has expired according to this list, and you don't have new eligibility information for them, then you would need to claim those children in the paid category until you have updated eligibility information that might qualify them in the free or reduced levels. And remember, there's a space on this form you can see here that's not highlighted that has the date of withdrawal. So if you have children who withdraw from your program, you feel free to note the date here to keep your records organized. A few tips. It's best to organize this list in the same way you organize your point of service and meal count sheets so that you can make your claim consolidation a bit easier. So if your list is according to each classroom, you might want to have a master eligibility record for each of your classrooms and organize it either alphabetically, by first or last name, however it's consistent with your other records. We do recommend that you keep each participant's eligibility documents with their enrollment forms and in this same order. And we'll show you what that looks like in a bit. On the screen here, you're going to see our most current version of the enrollment form. If you aren't currently using this form, we ask you to please go into the Mars Resource Center and download this. This is our current enrollment form. So we are no longer accepting the sticker on the top of the emergency cards. If we're able to come up with a new system, we will keep you posted. But for now, this is the system. And we need to remind you that every child must have an active enrollment form. And I said active because these also expire every 365 days. So please make sure that you note the date that this is signed and set up a reminder so that you can have the family fill out another form before it expires. For any child that does not have an enrollment form on file, according to USDA rules, you cannot claim those children for reimbursement. Okay, I'm going to say that again. MSDE would require you to repay any meals that were claimed for a child that does not have an enrollment form on file. So please make sure that you don't miss any children because of an expired enrollment form. And next, we're going to talk about the meal benefit applications. So every MBA is confidential. I'm sure you've heard us say that before. You should follow the standard confidentiality requirements as you do with other forms. You can find the childcare specific meal benefit application in the Mars Resource Center. Please make sure the form is complete. That means that you need to have a determination of which category that individual qualifies, a signature from your staff who made that determination, and the date that that happened. And again, those expire after 365 days, so please make sure you're keeping track of when those were signed and determined. And also make sure you're using the current year's income eligibility guidelines. They're updated each July 1st. And I'm going to give you one extra reminder here. If the eligibility has expired, we just talked about this, if the eligibility has expired until you get a new meal benefit application, you can still claim the child, but you can only claim them in the paid category. Okay, so if you don't have a piece of paper that is active that says they qualify for free or reduced, then you have to default to claim them in the paid category. Okay, and I've said this a couple different ways, but here it is in writing. If you have not received a meal benefit application or have other documentation that proves a child is eligible for free or reduced, then you need to claim them in the paid category. A lot of centers ask us, what do I do if a family does not return the meal benefit application? So this is, in order to spare you any fights and battles with families, please just make sure that you claim those children in the paid category. Okay. You can't force a family to complete one, so just make sure you're using good customer service to encourage completion, but that if you don't receive anything, use the paid category. Okay. So a few notes from our compliance team. They will be reviewing your MBAs and comparing that to your master eligibility list, as well as to your submitted claims. For each participant with an incorrect or incomplete meal benefit application, reimbursement for their meals will be recalculated, and agencies may be required to repay meals that were reimbursed if they were in the wrong category. So if you have mistakenly been claiming a child in the free category, when in reality they only qualified for the reduced level of reimbursement, that will that will result in an amount due back to MSDE. So that said, we want to make sure that you have a double check system in place to verify any of your determinations. That could be just a second set of eyes, especially on anything that involves calculations. All right, so we're going to take a look at what it would look like in a binder type setup for your eligibility documentation and enrollment forms. So we're going to start off with our master eligibility record. And you can see here that we have the names on the left, just as we saw on the sample slide a few minutes ago, and the date of determination, and then which category they qualified. So Peppa Pig is first. Immediately behind the eligibility record, we're going to find her MBA. Okay, and you can see that that is signed and dated with the category noted at the bottom. Behind that, we've kept her enrollment form. The next child on the list was Daniel Tiger. And here is the Tiger Family Meal Benefit application and Daniel Tiger's enrollment form. So you can see the pattern here. Each child, we're going to have the MBA or whatever documentation you have for their eligibility, followed by their enrollment form. Okay, so this is in the same order that you found on the eligibility record. Okay, the Addams family and an enrollment form, Flintstones MBA, and their enrollment form. So I've mentioned a couple times that if you don't have an MBA, you may have additional documentation that proves a child is eligible for free or reduced meals. Here's one example of what that could look like. An invoice detail report. So this is something that you would get that shows a couple different codes that can help prove a child is eligible for free or reduced price meals. So I'm just going to highlight a couple things on here that you see. The non-TCA, TCA, or TCC codes. All right, those are things to key in on. The one that automatically qualifies a child for free rate reimbursement is the one you see in the middle here, this TCA, which stands for Temporary Cash Assistance. So any child with that three-letter sequence, TCA, on this report is eligible for free meals. So from the time you discover that name on the list, you want to make a copy and put it with their enrollment form and certify the date that you made this determination. And that is enough to qualify them for free meals for the entire 365 day period. Okay, so again, this would be in place of a meal benefit application. If the family, we don't have a name there, of course, but if this particular family had completed a meal benefit application that said they were eligible at the reduced rate for reimbursement, and the next month you find that their name is on this list with the TCA code, now you can change their eligibility level to free. Okay, so that's something that you'd want to note on your master eligibility record because that's a change in category and now you're using this updated date and this is your documentation that they've qualified for free meals. Okay, so this type of information, this invoice detail report, trumps any existing meal benefit application. Okay, so that code of TCA is what we're really looking for there. And also for those centers that participate in Head Start, your Head Start roster would be automatic qualification for free meals as well. All right, so again, that TCA code is what you're going to try to key in on when you get this report. And a couple quick reminders about attendance and point of service. We're going to look at how storing these records would be. And I'm going to remind you about the job aid that we've produced. You see it on the right side of the screen here. So this is really helpful for staff training. We will have those available in the Mars Resource Center, and you can also reach out to your assigned program specialist if you need a copy again. All right, so here's what you're going to find as a good example of record keeping. These records should really be organized by month because that will help you consolidate your monthly claim. Meal counts, remember, must be taken when the meal is served. No forecasting or predicting is allowed. So this means you can't complete your meal counts before the meal is served, like in the morning. You also cannot rely on recall or memory to complete the record. This means you can't wait until nap time or once families have picked up the children to go back and complete your breakfast or lunch point of service. We want to remind you that we realize these are records in play during a mealtime, so some spills and stains are expected. They do not have to be kept pristine, so please don't bother trying to redo these forms if you get a little smudge on them, okay? Your agency needs to take extra care if you're trying to transfer this information into an electronic form because it's very easy to transpose or misread check marks from certain boxes. So please take extra careful time with that if you're trying to transfer the information. We do still require you to keep the original handwritten documents. So even if you are entering these into an Excel spreadsheet, for example, you still should keep the paper copy, okay, for the same length of time as everything else. So again, that's 3 full years plus the current year. All right. If your agency keeps your attendance on a separate record than the point of service sheets, then you must make sure to keep your attendance records together with your point of service. This is extremely important. This is what helps us verify that the meals served were actually served to children who were present that day. And I know that sounds silly, but that is an important part of accountability that the USDA expects. So you can see on the example on the screen here that attendance is listed right next to the meals. If your record does not have a way to track whether the child was present and then point of service listed next to it, then again, you have to keep the separate attendance record with your meal count sheets. Okay, please make note of that. The OSCNP, our team, reviewers will use your attendance records to verify the meals claimed were served to participants who were actually in attendance. It's one of the ways for us to determine that you have an accurate system for taking point of service. For example, your meal counts should never be higher than your attendance counts. Now the next section is documents to validate that your menu is implemented. So let's look at a couple examples. Daily dated menus must be kept with your CACFP records to document what was actually served. Note on the sample that you see on the screen that the fruit substitutions are handwritten right on the copy of the menu. Substitutions are unavoidable in food service. Sometimes the store will not have the exact product that you have on the menu, or a product delivered was spoiled. This record of what you served each day will be compared to your receipts during your compliance review, and together they prove that you met the CACFP meal pattern requirements. Remember, substitution should always be for the same meal pattern component. For example, if you had strawberries on the menu, but they've gone moldy, you can't substitute pretzels or carrots since those are not in the same meal pattern component as strawberries. You would need to find another fruit to use as a substitute for the strawberries. You can find the CACFP Child Menu Planner in the Mars Resource Center. That's what this center that you can see on the screen here used, which allows you to merely fill in the foods that you intend to use for each of the required components. It's a very helpful tool. Not required, but helpful. If your agency is licensed to care for infants, you must also have an infant menu on record. You can find our CACFP Infant Menu Planner and a sample menu in the Marge Resource Center. Again, if you are licensed to have infants and you have some enrolled, you must work with your families to complete an infant formula/breast milk plan for each of your enrolled infants. You should keep extra copies on hand because plans sometimes change throughout the year. You can find the infant formula/breast milk plan in the Marge Resource Center. Now moving on to thinking about receipts for your food, which I've mentioned just a few slides ago. A reminder that our compliance team will review your receipts to make sure that you are purchasing the foods listed on your menu, that you're buying enough to provide at least the minimum portions for all of your enrolled children, and that you're spending the majority of your reimbursement on food. Those are all expectations of being on the program. Here are some tips. Ink on receipts tends to fade over time. We highly recommend that you take pictures, make copies, or scan your receipts so that you can keep that copy for your records. You can cross out any item on the receipt that isn't program related and paid for using separate funds. We understand that you don't need to make two separate trips or always separate everything into multiple orders. So simply crossing out something that might be classroom instruction related so that it's clear you didn't use CACFP dollars towards those purchases. Many people ask about donation logs for any items you might receive that are donated. So it's important to make sure that you've noted the date that they were received, what exact product was received. So example, you wouldn't just write milk, you'd need to write down if it was non-fat milk or 1% milk, and you'd also have to write down the amount. Was it 1 gallon? Was it 2 gallons? Was it a quart? And then we also highly recommend that you note the source and that you're careful about the sources of your foods. Make sure that food safety observations are being kept. All right, so here are some examples about how receipts might look in your record. And you can see that the type is easy to read here, and that's because this is a picture of the receipt. I found that even 1 month after I save a receipt, the ink is already faded. And a note to our vended sites. Please make sure you keep your meal delivery receipts or meal tickets on file. You can see a sample of what one might look like on the right-hand side here. Please remember, contract monitoring is very important in this program. Even though you have contracted with a vendor, it is still your responsibility as our agency to make sure that the meal pattern is followed. So you must hold your vendor accountable to making sure that what they deliver meets the meal pattern specifications and follows the food crediting rules for CACFP. This means that they should be providing you on demand or ahead of time with documentation that products meet both the sugar and the whole grain rich requirements. You must hold your vendors accountable since it is your money on the line. In almost every case, there is contract language already embedded that specifies these requirements. Okay, so the next section we're going to move to here is about recipes and food labels. And this helps show that the foods you've chosen meet the USDA food crediting rules for CACFP. Let's look at some examples. Again, for our vended sites, you're going to need to keep your contract for the vendor right here in your binder or your file cabinet, or whichever style of documentation you're using. You can find the contract prototype in the Mars Resource Center. Please remember that the contracts must be approved before it starts, and the contract renewal date has to be noted because it has to not lapse in between contracts. You won't be allowed to claim meals until you have an active contract. And please make sure that you follow the correct procurement methods. Small procurement is for anything under $250,000. Next, you're going to need to store your standardized recipes. That's for anything that you make that has more than one ingredient. Using the USDA standardized recipes is the easiest way to help make sure you know your meal fits into the meal pattern. For example, for this recipe on the screen right now, one portion of their oven fried chicken provides 2 ounces of meat alternate, and 1 ounce equivalent of grain through the breading. Remember that recipes are required for combination dishes, and this you can see meets both the grain and the meat alternate. Again, here's another example of a combination dish, which is required to have a recipe because it's crediting in more than one component. This recipe even, I believe, has 3: grains, meat alternate, and vegetable. And here's another one for a casserole. Here is an example of a child nutrition label. There are some products that you purchase already prepared, and you will either need a child nutrition label or a product formulation statement to keep on record to show that these credit in the program. So most of these will be for pre-made or processed proteins such as fish sticks, chicken nuggets, or meatballs, or pre-made combination dishes such as lasagnas and casseroles. Here's another area where you do need to keep labels, and this is new in the past couple years, so make sure that you have up-to-date records for this. You'll need to keep cereal nutrition fact panels and product packaging to show that every cereal you serve meets the sugar limit. Remember that in order to be creditable in our program now, they must meet the sugar limit. If your cereal also meets the whole grain rich criteria, you must also save the ingredient list to show it meets both criteria. Okay, so this is an example. You would have the product package, enough to see the brand name of the product, the nutrition fact panel, and the ingredient list. There's another way to show that your cereal meets CACFP requirements, and that's to use the WIC authorized food list. And on the screen here, you're going to see an excerpt from the Maryland authorized food list. This one in particular shows all the cereals that are available. Every cereal listed here does meet the sugar limit, but not all of them meet the whole grain rich criteria. So I'm going to show you an example here. We can see you can circle the picture of a cereal that you've purchased, and this would be adequate proof that you've met the sugar criteria. As I mentioned, not all of them will also meet the whole grain rich criteria, so you're going to need to look for the icon that you see in this orange box up at the top, the little picture of a grain. So there again, we're going to see an example, the multigrain Cheerios, that meets both the sugar and the whole grain rich criteria. This is an easy way. We highly recommend it to help spare you some time in looking at individual labels. Another type of product where you do need to keep product packaging and information from the nutrition fact panel is for yogurt, because again, in order to be creditable, it must meet the sugar limits. So here again, we need to see enough from the package to know what product it is, as well as the nutrition fact panel that shows both the portion size and the sugar content. Okay, and again, you don't have to actually keep a yogurt container. You can take a picture as long as it's easy for our staff to read. For whole grain rich products, you need to keep both the ingredient list and enough of the product packaging to show us what product this is. You can see here we have an ingredient list and it looks promising, but it's very difficult to tell what product we're talking about. So please make sure you keep enough of the image from the package or take 2 separate pictures that you can show us exactly what product this is. Okay, so here's an example. We've got the picture of the whole package to show us the brand and the product with the ingredient list. So as with the cereal, the USDA also allows you to use the WIC list to help qualify your whole grain rich products. Again, this is an excerpt from the Maryland State WIC authorized food list. And again, you can simply copy these pages and circle the products that you're using to serve and fulfillment of your menu. Okay, so highlight, circle however you can to make sure that it's clear to our team which products you're using. Okay, you can see on the screen here that they have a section totally dedicated to pasta, some to tortillas, and some to breads and rolls. So the next topic we're going to talk about is training. Now, in theory, this is a requirement only for sponsoring organizations, but since we highly recommend this for all agencies, I'm going to talk about it as if everybody should be doing it. But sponsoring organizations, we do need you to particularly pay attention here. Childcare agencies that operate multiple sites must also keep some additional records. And so here we go. We're going to look at these. You must keep your self-review or on-site review, and this is a very helpful process for even single site operators to use because this does give you some heads up about what's going to be looked at when we come to do our review. For sponsoring organizations, remember that you have to review each site 3 times a year. 2 sites must be unannounced. Sorry, 2 visits must be unannounced, and 1 must include a meal observation. We're going to be talking a little bit about the nuances for the program year 2021, since on-site visits may be more challenging. So we're going to talk about some desk audit options for you. You can find this review form in the Mars Resource Center. And again, for our multi-site sponsors, you are required to provide training at each site on their CACFP duties each year. Again, we highly recommend that all single site operators also train and document their staff have received training on the CACFP each year. That's just good practice to make sure everybody understands their job because it does have a high consequence. A teacher that doesn't understand why they're taking point of service might not do it as comprehensively as they need to, and that could lead you into trouble with your claims. This form is also available in the Mars Resource Center. So now we'll take a look at how to document your own attendance at MSDE trainings. Okay. So here is an example of a certificate we've handed out for some of our in-person trainings. It may look a little different this year. We may send you a PDF form that you can print and keep with your records. In other cases, sometimes it is an email that might say that we verify that you've attended at a training. So please make sure that you keep any of the documentation that we've stated is associated with this training. Okay? Save all of these as proof that you've attended, and our program compliance team will be looking at these during your review to make sure that you're following through on the requirement for annual training on CACFP from our office. So the Maryland State Department of Education, Office of School and Community Nutrition Programs hopes that you have found this training helpful. After reviewing the requirements and some helpful tips for the record-keeping requirements for the CACFP, we encourage you to set up your own record-keeping system using this training as a guide. If you have any questions, please reach out to your assigned specialist, and we hope you have a healthy year, and we thank you for your attention. I will say that you can go back and re-listen to any part of this training as many times as you feel helpful. Again, we thank you for your attention. Take care. Be well.